So here we have a completed switch and 510. We need 3 of these to put inside one mid adapter, which we said is this piece right here. So in order to make one of these units, we have to first take the wire and cut 2 red pieces, because you can see there are 2 red pieces here. You can eye this and cut it kind of roughly, so that you have 2 equal red pieces, and then we want 1 black piece that is individually a little bit longer than one of the red pieces. Again, you can eye it. Now you have your cut wire for just 1 housing piece. So what we want to do now is strip the wire. It's 26 gauge, so look for the 26 gauge setting. And you want to strip a very small piece. This is too long. You want it to be shorter. So it should be about that length. And what we want to do is keep the black wires straight. Do not bend them. So just keep this in line with the actual wrapping of the wire. The red ones, what we want to do is we want to cut these as well. Again, short, 26 gauge. It's a little bit long. You want to snip it a little bit shorter. Yeah, one end. Then you have another end. Bend them at 90 degrees. This is different from the black wire. You should be bent to 90 degrees. You do that twice. You want 2 red pieces. If you notice your red wire is too long, you can just cut it a little shorter. And it looks like here we made it a little too long. So when you bend them at 90 degrees, you want the wires to stay together. You don't want them frayed out because you want them to solder together. Here, again, 90 degrees. There you go, you have your 2 red and your 1 black. Notice the black end, we don't need to pull off the wire or strip it on one end. You can only strip one end because that's the only end we care about at the moment. So now what you do is, we want to make it look like this. So the first step is to solder to your switch. To do that, you have to mount your switch in a vise, like this. And you can mount your vise into the table so it doesn't move. Now it's stuck. So what you want to do now is switch to the more precise tool for soldering. Make sure your sponge is wet and make sure you have the right tip. You can change tips. If the tip is hot because you've just finished soldering, this comes with a special rubber pad that you use to hold just this metal piece, and you can pull it out and drop it in here, and you can change your tip that way. For now, we're going to stick with this tip. It has like a flat edge, kind of like a screwdriver, and so we're going to use this one. It's cold right now, so we don't need this rubber pad. You just push it in until it's all the way in. Turn this on, you flick this switch, and you wait about 6 seconds. And to test that it's actually on, you just rub it on the pad. If you hear and see smoke, that means it's working. So now we have our clean solder tip, and we have our solder wire. We want to first wet these. Make sure your switch is firmly mounted. You want to wet these pins. What that means is you want to place solder on them so that they're primed for wire to go onto them. So now you've placed solder on these first 2 pins, 1, 2. Notice that you have to be careful which wire actually, what the orientation is on your switches. This broke off, see? This is an example of a bad soldering job. These wires have to be soldered carefully so that they actually stick well to your switches. Otherwise, the wire will come off. This is an example of an inferior job. So now that we have our stripped wires here, let's separate our work. So we have these 3 pieces we have stripped already. Let's take 1 piece and let's put solder on it. So first we put solder on our tip, fresh solder, and then we try to wet this. Wet means you just get it primed. So now it already has solder on it. Again, you do that for the other one. You can clean your tip in between. And again, take the solder, put it on, and what we do is prime it here, do it for the other end, you want to do it for both ends for each. I forgot to do it on one end for this one. You just keep drawing solder as you need it. And so your wires are ready. Oh, one more thing, you gotta do the black wire. And now we clean our tip. You can let it sit in here and keep the solder on, you don't have to turn it off. Now what we want to do is attach our red wires to the switch. So we want to use, for my right hand side, the first and the second pins. So first we're going to solder on to the middle pin, which is the second pin for my right hand side. And you may find that you need more solder. Maybe it's sticking, but you want to add a little bit more to make sure it doesn't move. And you can tug on it, and if it doesn't move, that means you have a good solder joint. You can flip this around now, unmount it, flip it around so you have a good angle, and do the first pin from my right hand side, which is now my left hand side. You want to be careful when you're soldering, and you want to keep the tip so that it doesn't remove solder from the first one. You notice it melted a bit and came off because my tip was too close. So you want to stay as close as possible to the pin you're soldering. And again, you want to add more solder so it's very stable. So notice one fell off. So you have to be careful in this procedure. This is an example of a bad solder joint because the wires aren't actually soldering on. This wire is not the best in terms of accepting solder. What we want to do is keep going with it until we have a big joint. And you don't want the wire joint to mix across. This looks like a good joint. We want to re-solder the old one because it fell off, and this time you're going to be more careful, make sure we don't melt the other one. Did it again. Looks like I'm not very good. If you're noticing that this is being quite a pain, what you can do is you can change your tip, shut it off, get an even finer tip. The tip we're using was kind of blunt. These are highly precise tips, $40 each, best in the world. You can get a more precise tip if it's being a pain, and now we shouldn't have any problems because this is a very, very pointy tip. And look at that, it's much easier now because this tip is smaller than the width of the distance between each pin. So there's no way for you to melt off another one. And this is a very great tip, so it's much easier now. And just like that, we have two good joints. So this is the recommended tip. Now that we have our switch soldered, you want to be careful which end you stick into this. So you can see that one of the red wires from the switch goes into the 510 that we had soldered before that is now cooled down. We had used this gun to do it. So this one right here, we're going to use the end that has solder on it. Notice you could use the other end, but that end, the third pin doesn't have solder. You want to pick the side that has solder, so this side. and you're going to place it here and solder right into the joint. You're going to melt this solder using our precise tool and have it flow right into the wire right here. So we're going to do that right now. We move off our device, clear our area. We take our 510, take our tip, pick the right end of the wire, and what we're going to do, melt this glob in the middle that you already had soldered, and get the wire to sit in there. Make sure that the wire is submerged. Then let it sit for about 5 seconds. Don't move your fingers for 5 seconds, and then you should have a really good joint. Do the same thing for the black wire. So this may be hot now because you've soldered it, but you can still touch it. So have it standing up. And there's solder here from when we had put it in the corner. So this is where the black wire goes. You want to go in the corner. You want to melt it. Hold your tip there. This has less heat, this precise tool, so it takes a little longer to melt. But you're going to see it within 4 to 5 seconds it melts. Keep your black wire in there. Hold it. Hold it. Let it sit for another few seconds, and looks like it didn't solder. So we got to go back. And you got to make sure the solder gets onto it. You got to look closely. And it looks like this time we got it. So now you've got to hold it. And let it sit. And if it's too hot to hold, you can hold it with this tool. And just tug on the wires. Be forceful. And it looks like they're staying. I'm pulling quite a bit on them. They're staying. That looks like you finished your first one. It may still be a little hot. Ow. So what you do is, you just move it with this tool. Notice here we burnt some of the wire while soldering. You want to avoid that. You gotta be careful where you place your soldering iron. This wire is still usable, but you gotta be careful. And you place it in the side, and you're done with your first one. We need 3 of these for each of these mid adapters, because it takes 3 of them. And in the next video, we're going to go over how we place these inside a mid adapter. Once you have a large pile of these, how do you use them in the mid adapter?